Tony was born in Kingsville, Texas on April the 12th, 1961. He was a very good baby. When he was little, he was pretty much an average 3 or 4 year old. But there were certain things that he couldn't adjust to. I started taking Tony to doctors and things to see what was making Tony agitated.
Tony's diagnosis was basically severely mentally retarded. Tony has been in an institution or some kind of therapeutic home ever since I can remember. Tony started exhibiting problems with food. They had a hard time keeping him away from it.
That was one reason he couldn't live in a group home, because they couldn't lock the food up. So over the years, we had to put him in the state institutions, and that was a bad day.
They put Tony into Bryce. We got a phone call that another client attacked him. A couple days later, Tony was moved to Partlow.
W.D. Partlow was one of 5 state-run mental health care facilities in Alabama. By 2010, it was the only one remaining open, despite its long history of abuse and neglect.
When I'd visit Tony at Partlow, sometimes you wouldn't know what to expect. He would be, look real good, but you might come down the next time and he'd have bruises and cuts and things that weren't really explainable. They'd always, usually chalk it up to Tony had did it himself.
After multiple incidents involving physical injury, Tony was moved from Home 10 to Home 1 on July 9, 2009.
When Tony moved from 10 to 1, to my knowledge, there was no change in his treatment plan. It was still to be followed that they had to have visual on him at all times.
To ensure Tony's safety and the safety of other patients, Prescott's individual support plan specified that he was to be monitored at all times. Because food was known to trigger aggression in Tony, his care plan specified that he was to be monitored during mealtimes to ensure that he did not forcefully take food from other patients. Since Tony had a history of physical aggression, the care plan included several goals and objectives, including a decrease in self-injurious and aggressive behavior.
He couldn't be around food. He could not leave food alone. I mean, he would eat until he made himself sick, and he would throw up, and he'd go back.
Despite the staff and administration's awareness of Tony's continuing struggles to control his impulsive and aggressive behavior, on the night of October 31st, 2010, shortly after dinner, Prescott was walking the halls of Home 1 unsupervised. Though Home 1's policy stated that all cabinets and closets were to remain locked at all times, Prescott had consistently been able to access the unlocked cabinets. On the night of October 31st, Tony once again found an unlocked closet where he knew food was stored. Unable to regulate his eating, Tony began to choke. Fighting to breathe and desperate to clear his airway, Tony went to the men's restroom, where he ultimately lost consciousness. Approximately 10 minutes after blacking out, Partlow employees discovered Tony and tried to revive him. Immediate efforts to clear his airway failed, so they attempted to use the suction machine. After trying numerous electrical outlets, it became apparent that the machine was faulty. Paramedics arrived shortly after and took Tony to Druid City Hospital in Tuscaloosa. At 9:15 a.m. on November 1st, 2010, Tony Prescott passed away. Prescott's death was the fourth reported fatal incident in just 3 months on the Partlow campus. As shown in this 2008 report by ADAP, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, or CMS, consistently cited Partlow for violations that put patients' lives in danger.
I have been in the mental health system for about 20 years. I'm a certified special investigator. And if something comes up, there's a process you do to investigate. And we never could get any information. Anytime there was an incident or he got hurt, they were to notify us. They would always notify us on the small things, but there were several times that we were not notified about major things that happened.
Did you know that Tony had diabetes?
We were never informed Tony had diabetes.
Despite the fact that Tony was supposed to be on a limited calorie diet, during his time at Home 1, his cholesterol, blood pressure, and weight were out of control.
Somebody wasn't monitoring his food intake.
Twice yearly, meetings were conducted to review patients' progress and update the care plan. These meetings included the social worker, the qualified mental retardation professional, or QMRP, teachers, staff, and on occasion, family members of the patient. During Tony's stay in Home 10, the freedom of movement restriction in his care plan remained unchanged. After moving to Home 1, his plan was reviewed at the last documented meeting on March 17, 2010. The restriction was, again, left unrevised. This meeting was scheduled by Diane Sally, the Home 1 manager, and attended by Susan Davis, the QMRP. However, though the staff and administration were aware that Prescott was continuing to struggle to control his behavior, a handwritten alteration was made to the plan by the QMRP, Susan Davis, and dated exactly 2 months prior to Tony's death, stating that the restriction had been removed when he was moved to Home 1. However, the restriction was still in place according to the meeting on March 17, 2010, more than a year after Tony was moved from Home 10.
Discontinue freedom of movement restrictions when he moves to Home 1. Move freely. The way the policy is set up, one person cannot decide that they're going to implement a right. The committee has to get together and come up with a plan, which includes how you're going to remove that restriction. So you have to have objective training programs in place to remove that restriction.
In fact, when asked if a QMRP could remove a restriction, the Department of Mental Health admitted that a change to a resident's level of supervision could only be made in an emergency situation, and that the change would require a follow-up team meeting.
We would have never agreed with this rights restriction being suspended because of safety issues.
On September 17, 2010, less than 3 weeks after the note was made regarding removal of the restriction, the Prescott family received a letter detailing minor injuries Tony had received. There was no mention of the rights restriction being removed. As a result of the unilateral decision by QMRP Susan Davis to revise Prescott's freedom of movement restriction, Tony was allowed to move freely through Home 1, where he found food cabinets that had been left unlocked. But Partlow's extensive record of safety violations goes beyond daily patient care. According to JCO regulations, life-saving equipment was to be routinely tested and maintained. Despite the regulation, they later acknowledged that the suction machine that could have saved Anthony Prescott's life was not in working order on the night Tony Prescott choked to death. Tests of the suction machine and outlets in the restroom proved that the suction machine was in fact faulty. Despite the many failures on the part of the staff and administration, Partlow's Mortality Review Committee report claims that nothing could have been done to prevent Prescott's death. Ultimately, the Department of Mental Health denied that their job was to keep Anthony within eyesight at all times, or that he had a history of issues with food. In fact, they even denied that their job was to monitor and supervise or even care for Tony Prescott. However, in the same report, Partlow's staff were instructed to implement policies and procedures that were being overlooked. And to upgrade the facilities to meet basic requirements of safety and patient welfare.
Tony wouldn't have died if they were doing their job. There was a lot of things they could have done that would have prevented this. It's just all so unnecessary. He was family. We loved him. And my mother will never be the same.
No, I dream about Tony. And I always dream he's an angel. I said maybe the Lord's telling me something.
He didn't need to die like he did. And it just breaks my heart. That's all I have to say.